954, a bill to reauthorize agricultural programs through 2018.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before the distinguished chair of Judiciary Committee leaves the floor and former chair of the Agriculture Committee leaves the floor, I just want to thank him not only for being a wonderful role model for me in chairing the Agriculture Committee, but also for the way in which he conducts the Judiciary Committee with an even hand, fairness, giving every member the opportunity to make their case, whether it's legislation coming through on gun violence or immigration or whether it's judicial nominations. Just want to thank Senator Leahy for being the model of a statesman in all that he does, and I agree with him that we need to move forward in a fair and open bipartisan way in filling the nominations of our judiciary. So I just want to thank you very much. Mr. President, we are resuming the consideration of the Farm Bill, the Agricultural Reform and Food and Jobs Bill, but I do want to take a moment before doing that, as many colleagues have already done and many, many more will do, to pay a very special tribute to a dear friend and a colleague, Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey. I was deeply saddened, as we all were today, to learn that he had passed away during the night, and my thoughts and prayers are with Bonnie and the whole family, as I know that they are grieving now because of the special loss that they feel and that we will all feel. He was the kind of senator we won't see again, a World War II veteran. We have lost our World War II veterans. He defended freedom against some of the most evil forces of the 20th century, and he was truly a member of the greatest generation of Americans. We saw him battle cancer and survive. We've seen him come to the floor time after time on behalf of the people of New Jersey and our country to fight for what he believed was right with tremendous courage. I dare say he is one of the lions of the Senate, serving for nearly 30 years, casting over 9,000 votes on behalf of the state and the people that he loved. What makes Congress special is that we all come from all walks of life, all kinds of areas. That's what makes a great democracy, as we know. That's what gives us our strength, not our weakness. Senator Lautenberg was the son of Jewish immigrants. He went to school on the GI Bill, like my dad did, after defending our country, and then went on to be a successful businessman, developing one of the most successful payroll companies in the world. So we're proud to have Senator Lautenberg speaking for what it means to be a success in creating jobs, and he has been a wonderful voice in that regard. He found his true calling in public service, though, and we all know that. During his 5 terms in the United States Senate, he was one of the most fearless fighters on a whole range of things. He has made a permanent mark on the quality of life of Americans, strengthening drunk driving laws, passing the ban on smoking on airplanes, preventing those convicted of domestic violence from possessing guns, authoring legislation to help the public discover what pollutants are being released into their neighborhoods, and co-writing the new GI Bill for the 21st century. And I could go on with so many other things. I'm proud to have worked with him to champion cleaning up our beaches all along our coasts and our Great Lakes, working to increase the awareness and treatment of autism, and fighting to make sure that women have access to the health care that we need and deserve. He was a true fighter for the rights of all Americans, and he will be greatly missed. So once again, I would send my thoughts and prayers to his family, his wife Bonnie, she herself, an amazing woman in her own right, and their children and their grandchildren at this very difficult time. As we return to the debate on the Farm Bill today, Mr. President, it's important to note that what we do this week will reflect just how committed we are to 16 million Americans who depend on agriculture for their livelihood, and all Americans who depend on their success for the safest, most affordable, abundant food supply in the world. We have to lead by example. We can't kick the can down the road. We in the Senate have already worked hard together on this farm bill. It passed out of the Agriculture Committee with broad bipartisan support. On the floor, we've had a good debate and a number of votes, and we're close to finishing the bill, and we need to get it done this week. I will notice that it was just a year ago that we were also working on this bill. At that time, after coming out of committee on a strong bipartisan vote as well, we had 73 record roll call votes, Mr. President, 73 record roll call votes. And every one of the substantive amendments that was passed on the floor is already in this bill. So we started with the work that we did a year ago and the amendments of colleagues that were passed on the floor of the Senate. And now we are building on that with additional ideas, and we know that it's time to bring this to a close and be able to get this done so we can move forward and make sure that the people who rely on agricultural policy, conservation policy, nutrition, energy policy, rural development, every community outside of our major cities depends on rural development funds in order to be able to provide economic development, build the water and sewer project, build the road, provide a loan for a small business. They're all counting on us to get this done so they have some long-term certainty. This is a jobs bill, and the 5-year bill in front of us needs to get passed so they have certainty about how to plan for the future and how to continue to create jobs. We also need to pass this bill because we need to stop unnecessary spending, and we do that in this bill. We need to also ensure that consumers will continue to have a safe, healthy, and affordable food supply. And we need to come together to show once again that we can work together across party lines as we have done on this legislation. It's important to get this done this week. I'm very proud of the fact that after last year being the only committee that produced a voluntary deficit reduction plan, we went through every single page of the policy under the Farm Bill, and I asked that we determine, does it duplicate something else? Does it work? Is it needed anymore? Is it worthy of taxpayer dollars? And at the end of that, we had eliminated 100 different programs or authorizations, some by consolidating and strengthening them, like in conservation. Others we just eliminated because they didn't make sense, things like direct payment subsidies that didn't make sense. And altogether, last year we were able to produce $23 billion in savings. Well, this year we went back at it again, looked at a couple of other things, and it's $24 billion in savings to reduce the deficit. Now, to put that in some kind of a context, under the across-the-board cuts that we've all known now to be called the sequester, the across-the-board cuts over the next 10 years for every agency, in agriculture, that across-the-board cut is $6 billion. So we could have said, well, sequester is $6 billion, we'll find $6 billion in savings. We didn't do that. We found 4 times as much savings by saying we want to make sure that we can come to the floor of the Senate and tell every colleague that there's integrity in every program, that we've done everything we can to cut duplication, to create accountability, and provide policies that make sense for the American taxpayer. So we don't do subsidies anymore. We do insurance. We partner with farmers to buy insurance so they've got skin in the game, and then they don't receive a check. They get a bill for the insurance, but just like any other insurance, there is no payout unless you have a loss. So that's the basic structure. We have done a tremendous amount to also hone in on areas of, frankly, misuse or abuse in policy as it relates to the commodity title as well. For instance, this bill caps payments in the commodity program to half of what they currently are. So we cut in half the current limit on what can be received by an individual farmer. And Senator Grassley, Senator Tim Johnson deserve tremendous credit. Senator Grassley, as a member of our committee, has championed these reforms and payments for years. And this is the first farm bill that's actually been in the base bill. So we are cutting in half the payments. We closed something called the manager's loophole to ensure that so-called farm managers have to actually be farming. You have to actually be farming, Mr. President, to get a farm payment. Now, today, the Washington Post has an article that I would encourage folks to actually read today, who talks about folks who are in Manhattan and Georgetown and live in multi-million-dollar homes and receive these payments. They're not farmers. But because of the current structure and the lack of accountability and focus, they are actually getting this payments. They don't get that anymore under this bill. Important reforms. This bill saves money by tightening rules to prevent fraud and misuse in our nutrition programs. Our nutrition programs are critical, Mr. President, critical and essential. Just as crop insurance is there when a farmer has a disaster, food programs are there when a family has a disaster. But we know, as in anything else, that there are areas where there can be abuse or waste. In my own home state, much to my chagrin, we have seen lottery winners continue to receive food assistance. We stopped that. We cracked down on retailers engaged in trafficking of benefits. And we prevent states from allowing some individuals to claim expenses they don't really have in order to increase their benefits. By ending the misuse, but making sure that we keep the standard benefit for every man and woman and child who deserves some temporary help, we are putting more integrity into the food programs. And I would argue we need to make sure that we stand strong against the cuts to actual people that are coming from the House of Representatives when we talk about food assistance for folks who've paid taxes all their lives, never thought in their wildest dreams they would ever need help. They're mortified, suddenly find themselves out of work, and need to know this. Somebody will be there to help them put food on the table until they get back on their feet. Our bill does that while creating accountability. And I'm very proud of the work that our committee has done. We also have streamlined programs not only to save dollars, but to create more flexibility. And the area of conservation is one that there's been tremendous work done in. And we have over 650 conservation and environmental groups across the country that are endorsing our work in conservation. Even though we took 23 conservation programs and cut it down to 13, and then put it in 4 different, very flexible areas, they see it as an improvement because we're cutting down the paperwork, we're making it more flexible for farmers, for community groups to be able to access conservation programs, and we're actually saving money as we're doing that. We also, in this bill, as you know, have codified a very important agreement that environmentalists, conservation groups, and farm commodity group leaders have come to in supporting crop insurance and making sure that those who receive crop insurance are compliant with conservation. A very, very important policy, and I want to commend everybody who worked so hard on it. And once again, as we go into this week, I want to remind colleagues that this is a jobs bill. Agriculture is a bright spot in our economy. It's the only area where we actually have a trade surplus. And the Farm Bill invests in a number of areas to boost exports, to help family farmers sell more goods locally. We do some changes. While we are cutting in certain areas, we actually increase in others. That's what we ought to do when you make good policy decisions. So we've increased funding for farmers markets, local food hubs, the ability for schools to be able to purchase more fresh fruits and vegetables locally, things that create jobs locally. We have spurred innovations in new bio-based manufacturing, not just bioenergy, but we can replace chemicals and petroleum with things like soybean oil and other agricultural byproducts that actually are cleaner, biodegradable, create jobs, and get us off of foreign oil. So there are new initiatives in the Farm Bill that allow us to do that as well. Mr. President, it really is a time for reform in the policies that fall under what we dub the Farm Bill. And this bill, I believe, and I think it's safe to say, is the most reform we have seen in decades. We've done it in a bipartisan basis. We've made tough votes, tough decisions, but I believe they are the right decisions in terms of reform. This is a bipartisan effort coming out of committee 15-5, and I hope and expect a strong bipartisan vote as we had a year ago as well. And this really is a jobs bill. It really is a jobs bill, and in order to keep it a set of jobs policies, our farmers and ranchers need to have the economic certainty of getting this done and having a 5-year policy that will allow them to plan and to continue to create the safest, most affordable food supply for Americans of anyone in the world. So it's time to get it done. We're anxious to work with colleagues this week to do that. Thank you, Mr. President. I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Sure. Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call and process be
Without objection, so order.
I ask unanimous consent that I be recognized as if in morning business for what time as I shall consume.
Without objection, so order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tomorrow, the Armed Services Committee is going to hold a hearing on the pending legislation regarding the sexual assault in the military. Now, lately we've been bombarded, we've been inundated with news reports about sexual assault in the military. Our nation, can't lose sight of the fact we have the finest military in the world. The presence of sexual predators in our forces does not take away from the overwhelming good that's done around the world by our members in uniform, but the presence of these sexual predators in the ranks needs to be addressed. And that's what the military is doing now, with or without our interference. Last year's NDAA, that's the National Defense Authorization Act, signed into law, that was in January of this year, 2013, included 10 new provisions dealing with sexual assault that commanders have barely had time to begin implementing, let alone to assess the effectiveness of these. Yet some want to provide still more changes in the law this year. These commanders need time to act. You can't keep piling new demands on our commanders until they have had time to meet the previous demands. That's what the hearing really tomorrow is all about. We're going to be talking about more demands along these lines. Now today, sexual assault has not been eliminated, but we are working on it. The battle's not lost. More needs to be done. We understand that, and more is going to be done. But we've got to preserve the leadership tools that make our forces the finest in the world. One such tool has been to give commanders authority to identify and correct problems firmly and fairly, and dispose of disciplinary offenses that destroy morale and readiness. And that's why I oppose the proposals to eliminate the role of the commander in this process. To take the commander out of the process will invite failure. These commanders have to make decisions to send our brave troops into battle. How ludicrous is it that we would say to our commanders, you've got to make a decision to send one of our kids into battle where they may end up losing their lives, but however, you can't participate in the justice system of the troops. It doesn't make any sense at all. As we consider the many proposals to combat sexual assault in the military, we can't lose sight of the importance to do three things. The three things are protect, prevent, and preserve. We've got to protect the critical role of the commander in driving cultural change and accountability. We've got to prevent case disposition authority from being transferred outside the chain of command. We all, those of us who have been in the service, know what that is. And thirdly, we've got to preserve the integrity of the Uniform Code of Military Justice as an integrated, functional system of justice. So first, we've got to protect the critical role of the commander. The military is a hierarchy. The most junior recruit quickly learns that there is always someone above him in the military organization. I've been there. I understand that. Troops have been instilled in them the need to follow the chain of command. That's what they do. That's not a social system. This is a chain of command. Our military is both an organization of leaders and of followers who are in training to become leaders. In peacetime or in war, leaders establish clear expectations and insist on meeting objectives. Every job in the military is important, and every job needs to be done correctly because lives depend on it. The security of our nation also depends on it. To ensure that the tough jobs get done, the military has a justice system which sets the expectation that decisions have consequences, and I might add, bad decisions have consequences also. Today, there are 4 major bills which have been introduced to address perceived deficiencies in how the armed services address sexual assault. Now, I think these very likely are going to be discussed, maybe not all 4 of them, but some of them are going to be discussed in tomorrow's hearing. I believe before we make significant substantive and procedural changes to the law, including the UCL-MJ, we need the benefit of adequate review. We need to think before we act. We've got to prevent case disposition authority from being transferred outside the chain of command. It's a terrible idea to remove authority of commanders to dispose of the military justice offenses. If commanders will be held responsible for abolishing sexual assault, then they must have the tools that they need. Some propose establishing colonel-level JAGs, that's Judge Advocate Generals, instead of commanders as disposition authorities who would decide what cases should go to the courts-martial. An awesome authority of the commander is the foundation of discipline within the organization. The most junior service member in the organization knows under the current law that their commander has the ability to decide if misconduct should be disposed of through administrative measures, by non-judicial punishment, or by courts-martial. Others within the command watch how the commander deals with misconduct. All this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, Mr. President, but people are watching. Those individuals who are going to be under the control and command and jurisdiction of a commander have to know how they're doing it. If the commander is not allowed to exercise that authority, it will destroy discipline within the command. When discipline declines, the military's ability to confront threats declines with it. Another proposal, that's the first one, another proposal would create 2 separate disciplinary systems, one in which the commanders retain limited ability to dispose of minor, uniquely military offenses, another where a judge advocate far removed from the commander decides what offenses go to trial by court-martial. Now, how can 2 systems possibly be more efficient and effective than one system in the hands of commanders who are fully vested in the wellness and the readiness of our commands? Another proposal would revoke designation of certain senior officers who are currently authorized by federal law to convene general courts-martial. This has broad implications beyond military justice. This would require the services to revise literally hundreds of service regulations. But another proposal I think is worthy of careful review would establish a special victims council. The proposal would assign an attorney to the victim of sexual assault to provide advice throughout the process from initial complaint of sexual assault through final disposition. The Air Force has already developed a pilot program. We are doing it now. So the suggestion, I think, is good, but it's something that we're currently doing. And wouldn't it be better to wait and get the results of what the Air Force is doing on their program to determine whether or not this is something that we want to continue? Now, I'm willing to consider appropriate changes in the UCMJ and a thoughtful bipartisan approach that is consistent with the longstanding traditions of the Committee on the Armed Services. In the fiscal year 13 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, we created an independent panel to review the UCMJ and judicial proceedings of sexual assault cases. The panel is tasked with assessing the response systems used to investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate sexual assault and related offenses, and to recommend how to improve effectiveness. The Commission has only just begun, and we must allow the opportunity to do what it was created to do. So we established this thing. That was just last January, Mr. President. We established this, and they're busy doing what we've asked them to do. The sexual assault cannot be abolished by legislation alone. While we should not wait to provide additional tools that could make a difference immediately, we've got to be deliberate in making fundamental changes that could undermine the UCMJ. And I said we should do three things, and this is the third thing. The third thing is to preserve the integrity of the UCMJ as an integrated, functional system of justice. Since 1951, the UCMJ has backed up commanders' authority and their best leadership skills with the force of law. The UCMJ is a deployable justice system that has proved to be effective throughout our nation's conflicts. Some believe military justice under the UCMJ and the Manual of Courts-Martial is an informal, undisciplined system. Nothing could be further from the truth. The UCMJ is a highly developed and codified legal system. The rules of court-martial are the military counterpart to the federal rules of criminal procedure and provide detailed and structured procedural rules. The military rules of evidence are based on the federal rules of evidence. The UCMJ has been at the forefront of changes in the civil criminal justice system. In fact, it's been ahead of the civil system. They're doing things in advance of what the civil system actually does. A rights warning statement similar to the now familiar Miranda warnings was required by Article 31 of the UCMJ a decade and a half before the Supreme Court decision of Miranda versus Arizona. The UCMJ was offering these protections long before the civil courts did. Same thing with Article 38B. It continued the 1948 Articles of War guarantee of qualified defense counsel, in other words, you get a defense counsel, to be provided to all accused at the earliest stages than required under civil jurisdictions. So the military was providing counsel long before the civil system was. Yet the U.S. Supreme Court only guaranteed counsel to the poorest criminal defendants in 1963. Again, UCMJ was way ahead of the game. Our nation has 238 years of investment in our military justice system, a system of federal law, rules of procedure and evidence, and case history interpreting those rules that form the foundation for one of the most comprehensive and sophisticated justice systems the world has ever known. The UCMJ is not static and unchanging. It's continuously been updated. Article 146, the UCMJ requires an annual comprehensive update. The Joint Service Committee reviews recommendations to modify the UCMJ on a regular basis. Some remain committed to yet another round of changes to the law, and in fact, the recently passed fiscal year 2013 NDAA included some 10 legislative changes addressing sexual assault in the military. The services need adequate time to implement recent legal changes and that give them the tools to fight these assaults. Now stop and think about it. Just last January, we gave 10 new rules for them to absorb and put into play. And they haven't had time to do that yet, and yet we're talking about having a meeting and putting together something would be maybe even contradicting what we've already told them to do. Some would criticize our commanders and the entire military justice system because of a recent case in which a court-martial conviction was set aside. If you take time to look at the statistics, you'll see commanders have only set aside findings of guilty in about 1% of the cases. The Marine commanders only set aside findings in 7 cases out of 1,768 cases, Mr. President, or that's 0.4%, less than 1%. The Air Force commanders only set aside findings of 40 in 3,713 cases over 5 years. That's 1%. The Army commanders set aside findings of only 68 of 4,603 cases since 2008. The Navy says its commanders only set aside findings in 4 of the 16,056 cases that they've tried from 2002 to 2012. That's 0.000 of 1% in a 10-year period. So clearly, the commanders have been doing a good job. The Defense Legal Policy Board released a subcommittee on military justice and combat zones just last week. Now, this Defense Legal Policy Board was put together. They have experts in there to study this thing. We all agreed this was a good move, and they came out with a report last week. This isn't something that might have happened 2 or 3 years ago. It happened just last week. The subcommittee began its work on July the 30th, 2012, to assess the application of military justice in combat zones in Afghanistan and Iraq. This report states since the beginning of 2001, the Army conducted over 800 courts-martial in deployed environments. The Navy and Marines conducted 8 courts-martial in Afghanistan and 34 in Iraq. The Air Force conducted 3 courts-martial in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. The main theme of the Defense Legal Policy Board's subcommittee hearings and their 208-page report is the need for a joint commander to have a central role in the administration of justice in deployed theaters of operations. Now, this is just the opposite of what some people are saying now. They're saying take the commander out of this. I'm going to read this, and this is a quote. This report, Mr. President, came out just a week ago. I'm quoting now. While good order and discipline is important and essential in any military environment, it is especially vital in the deployed environment. The military justice system is the definitive commander's tool to preserve good order and discipline, and nowhere, I repeat, nowhere is this more important than in a combat zone. A breakdown of good order and discipline while deployed can have a devastating effect on mission effectiveness. I'm still quoting now, Mr. President. This is the report that came out last week. The Joint Commander is ultimately responsible for the conduct of his forces. As such, this subcommittee has determined that the Joint Commander must, and that's capitalized, have the authority and apparatus necessary to preserve good order and discipline through the military justice system. Let me repeat, this is the last line, and I'm quoting again. As such, the subcommittee, the experts that were looking at this, came out with the report last week. The subcommittee has determined that the Joint Commander must have the authority and apparatus necessary to preserve good order and discipline through the military justice system, unquote. So the services can do better, and they will. But the record clearly demonstrates these commanders take their responsibility very seriously, and we should continue to let them lead the men and women of our armed forces into battle, bring them home safely, and to use all the tools in the military justice system to enforce their authority. At the very least, let's give the commanders a chance to implement the changes that we just ordered them to make as recently as last January before we go into imposing more systems on them. So, Mr. President, I really believe that we are perhaps, I know it's popular to do this and say that we have all these sexual harassments and all that, but these figures speak for themselves. These are facts, and I think that we really can't expect our people, our commanders in the field, the ones who are responsible for the life and death of the troops that they send in harm's way, to continue to spend all of their time making these changes and not even have time to make the changes we ordered them to do last January. With that, I request of a quorum. I'm sorry. I noticed the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. And here in the Senate in a quorum call, they're back, first day back today from their week-long Memorial Day break. The Senate working today on the Farm Bill, and off the floor work on comprehensive immigration reform. Senate Leader Harry Reid says he's hoping to begin consideration of the immigration bill the week of June 10th. And also today, the death of Senator Frank Lautenberg, who died from viral pneumonia. He was 89 years old. He served 2 separate times in Congress, and he came out of retirement in 2002 to take the seat of a colleague who was facing corruption charges. Some of the statements that came out today in tribute to Senator Lautenberg, one from New Jersey Congressman Frank Pallone, who said his work on issues like gun violence prevention, improving our nation's transit systems and transportation infrastructure, making Americans healthier through anti-smoking initiatives, and rebuilding our state after the devastation of Superstorm Sandy would be recognized for generations. And his colleague, Senator Menendez, saying that Frank Lautenberg loved his job and the people who elected him 5 times, who trusted him to always be on their side, and he always was. We'll hear from Senator Menendez. He's expected to take the floor at 5 p.m. Eastern in about 20 minutes for a tribute to Senator Frank Lautenberg, who died at the age of 89.
Majority Leader.
I ask you to consent the call to quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in just a few minutes, senators will cast votes on 2 amendments to the Farm Bill that's now pending before this body. But before we do, I want to take just a minute to acknowledge that the senior senator from Montana, Max Baucus, has cast more than 12,000 votes over the past 3 decades with this institution, the United States Senate.